Happy Friday, everyone. I get to say something that I will say for the last time this semester. It's Excel Friday. So everybody looks forward to Excel Friday, but it's the last one. Is a little bit of tear should flow from your eye, an Excel-shaped tear. Yeah. It's going to be a last day for activity like this. Obviously, there's a little bit of give and take on that because everybody loves doing stuff in Excel, but you have to remember this stuff for the exam. So just as a reminder, any of the content I cover in the Excel assignments will be viable for the exam. I've already mentioned that index match will be one of the questions, but there means there will be two other questions on other various topics, and which we're going to talk about today. All right, so with respect to what we're going to cover today, I want to provide a little bit of context. So several years ago, the accounting department or the accounting program basically decided on things that we wanted all of our students to learn in Excel. And for your other classes, you've got a limited list. And for AIS, they said everything. Okay. So and so I have a list of things that I go through to cover to some degree. And some of it's redundant to the 153 class, some of it's new. Today is going to see a little disaggregated. It's going to be like, why are we covering this with this? And the answer is this is basically everything we have not covered in the class that's on that list, this things we need to cover. All right. So anything that we cover in class today, again, still viable for the exam. But if it seems like I'm jumping around from spot to spot, the answer is that I'm jumping around from spot to spot. So that's kind of the rationale behind it. So some of the stuff really interesting, and I think it's a fascinating improvement from what we've talked about. Some of the stuff I can't think of any context that I've ever actively used it. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these. So the first one is going to be the AND function. And if you've had any experience of the AND function, so let me just preface this by saying that I get really offended when students say, okay, boomer to me, because I'm not a boomer. I'm from Generation X, okay? I refuse to take blame for all the problems that the boomers caused, all right? But if you want to say, I was referring to you in the context of being an Excel boomer, I'm going to say, that's fair, all right? I am definitely an Excel boomer. I'm slow to adopt new tools and new techniques. As we talked about in our VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs earlier in the semester, I heard from one of my graduate students who teaches the 153 course, they don't even teach VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs in that course anymore. They just teach XLOOKUPs. I'm like, that's a travesty. Everybody should know a little bit of everything. So that being said, this new function that we're going to talk about today is one that I have readily adopted. It took me a while, but I picked it up and I run with it now. And so it's called the AND function. And effectively, it's a replacement for the concat function or the concatenate function, whichever one you use. So one of the reasons this is kind of non-intuitive to me is remember when we talked about functions at the beginning of the semester and I said you have to start your formula, we have to start your formula with the formula name, and then you fill in the arguments. This function or this formula actually throws that out the window. This formula basically says we can use it at any point within the formula. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to concatenate the word concatenate. This is why you all pay me the big dollars to teach you how to concatenate the word concatenate. All right. So we're going to type in equals. We're going to go over to B3. And then we're going to type in the and symbol, which is just shift and the number 7. And then we're going to go over to C3. That's it. That's all there is to it. There you go. Put together the word concatenate right there. And to my mind, that is much, much easier than the concat function or the concatenate function, whichever one you want to use, just in that. And I've been using that. We can go ahead and use that on the same in the same context in the same way that we used it with my name before. So remember we did concat with my name and we had to learn how to do that. Let's do that for this function or this formula. So let's go ahead and go equals B4. Then we're going to do the and symbol. And remember, there has to be a space between the names. So we're going to go quote, open quote, space, close quote. Then we're going to do another and symbol. Then we're going to do C4. We get the same exact result with a lot less work. So if you're if you use that fairly frequently, then you're a adopter that has been able to take advantage of it much more quickly than I have. If you haven't used it, I will say that this is a function that I think is a much better to use tool than the concat function. That being said, it's good to know both so that you can interpret both if you see them in a spreadsheet. All right, the next function is going to be one that I have used. I can count on maybe on one hand outside of this classroom that I've used it. This is called the value function. Now, the value function is just basically a conversion of a text field that should be a numeric field back into a numeric field, or a conversion of a non-numeric field into a numeric value. So the easiest way that this would come up would be something like this right here. You'll notice that we've got the number 1,000, but we've got an ugly green arrow up in the left-hand side. And there's a yield sign here, and it says this is formatted as a text or preceded by apostrophe. And the reason that is that's because how I entered it into Excel. I deliberately did that, all right? So this is not an error. This is something I did. Now, there's an easy way to fix this. An easy way to fix this, if we wanted to format the base value, we could just go into here, yield, and click on convert to number, all right? And if you went ahead and did that, make sure you undo that, because I want to leave this in this format. But that's how I would normally fix this problem, is just going convert to number. Now, what might be a reason that I would not do that here? And the answer is, if I have base data that I want to leave exactly as formatted and as input, then I may want to just convert it in a different cell. And this is where the value formula would come into to prominence, okay, where would we actually be able to use it? So let's assume we do not want to change the contents of this cell right here. We want to leave it exactly as input, but we want to convert this to a number. How could we do that? We could use the value formula. So let's go ahead and do that. So value, B7, enter. And there you have it. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now, interestingly, there are a couple other ways that we could actually use the value function that might be relevant, all right? You will notice below that I've got the time that begins our class, and then we've got the date of today's class. And as I've said before, time and date are just numeric conversions in Excel. So can we convert the time and date into the numeric values without changing the base formula or the base cells? And the answer is yes. We can just copy. And then I'm going to paste this, but I'm going to do a paste of formulas. Now you may say, why did you do formulas, Dr. Barnes, instead of just paste? Well, if I just do a normal paste, it's going to copy everything, including the format. And you'll notice the format looks a little bit different for the two cells. So I want to keep the format that I have set in these cells already. That's why I use the paste formulas right up here. So interesting. This may come up again in just a second, but that's why we would use for a value function in this particular context. Now, for the next function, I'm going to be honest. In about 30 years of using Excel, I have never used this function outside of this classroom, all right? I cannot think of a context in which it would be useful, but it's one that I have to teach you according to our requirements. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about it. This is the text function. And as the name applies, this would be where we would take a numeric value and put it back into text, okay? So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because honestly, I do not see a lot of value for it. I'm going to go ahead and spoil this. This one won't be on the exam, okay? Because I just don't think that it's real important. Now, if you in the real world, if you got in the real world and start using this function very regularly, I would really appreciate it if you tell me the context in which you would use this function, because I can't see a lot of apparent value for it. I may be missing something big picture, but what does this function do? Let's just go ahead and put it in and see what happens. Equals text. And then we want to put in the B1 is the value, and we want to format it to say, what do we want to return? So we're going to open quotations, and we're going to say 0.00%. And that's just basically telling you, and you have to close quotes on that, telling you it's how it's a format. So that's what your formula should look like. And if it's the number one, what percentage is the number one? 100%, okay? So that should be the result that we come up with, and lo and behold, it is. And it's formatted exactly how I specified. And it's going to be listed as a text field now. So that's basically the only thing we need to learn about it. And like I said, this is not one of those ones that I think has a whole lot of value, but it does make sense that if we have value conversion of text to number, then we have text function of number to text. And it's just kind of a transpose. Could there possibly be some reason this comes up? Yes, I just can't think of one off the top of my head, or at least I've never encountered one. All right, now to do something a little bit more fun. How many people have watched the old Disney movie Mary Poppins? Or maybe saw the Broadway musical? I heard it was a Broadway musical, so yeah. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, yes. I said after I did that the first time I was never going to sing it again, and now I've done it every single time in class, you know. So yeah, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. It's a fun word, okay? How many letters are in the word supercalifragilisticexpialidocious? Anybody know off the top of their head? 34, because you did the link function already? Yeah. Or did you just was that a random piece of knowledge? Like, yeah, I actually know that. I'm ready for the trivia competition. I'm gonna go to one of the trivia competitions in Kirksville, and I'm gonna say, okay, you need to ask the number of letters. And everybody's gonna be like, oh crap, SUPERF. So it's a link function. So we can actually do LEN and go to the formula, say 34 letters. Okay, so link function, which can be very, very helpful. But let's be honest, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious is not a real word. You know what is a real word? Pneumono-ultramicroscopic silicovolcaniconiosis, the longest word in the English language. Anybody knew that already? You know why I knew that? Because I'm a big nerd. And back when I was in high school, my friends and I, we did random pieces of trivia, like what's the longest word in the English language, just to be impressive. So yeah, it's a word, and it sounds a lot more impressive than it actually is. It's just a form of pneumonia. Okay, restricted intake of coal. It's a coal miner's disease, which actually makes it a lot more sad. And so, but what if we want to know the number of letters in that word right there? So 45 letters in the longest word in the English language. It is kind of a fun word to say. It just means something very, very unfun right there. But yeah. But the question is, would that come up on the exam? Probably not. I say that would maybe be like a fun short answer question. What's the longest word in the English language? See if anybody could replicate that. But you don't need to study that for the exam. That's just brain power being taken up with random stuff. Now, what are some reasons, some ways that we could use a link function in a practical manner? It's all well and good to look at long words and say, how many letters are they? But let's talk about some ways that we can pair it with other functions to come up with something relevant. So I've got the name Michael Barnes and Stacy Caden. And I want to split out the last names, okay? And you notice I have the first names listed here. What's an easy way to split out the last names? Well, you're probably going to say text to columns is an easy way, Dr. Barnes. And you're probably right. Text to columns would be an effective way to do that. But there might be some reasons why you do not want to split out using text to columns. And that a part of it might be because you want to retain integrity of the original data. It also might be that if you have specific parameters that are not consistent between names, then it might mess up if you use text to columns. So let's go ahead and use the length function to see if we can split out the last name. We're going to do this disaggregated, and then we're going to do it as a joint function together. So first thing, we're going to use a length function equals len, and we're just going to look at this first name because we know the first name is listed over here. So Michael has 7 letters in it. Funny story, one time I actually said it has 6 letters. I've had this name for 53 years now, going on 54, and I didn't know how many letters are my own name. But I do know that it's 7 letters now, and I will never, ever forget that again because it was very embarrassing. And we know that Stacy Caden has 6 letters in that name. So Stacy has 6 letters first name. All right, so let's go ahead and pair that information with the mid function so we can split out the last name. So let's go ahead and go equals mid. Oops. So we're going to go over to the B17. That's the text. And the start number, I'm going to refer over to this length function we just put in, which is F17. And I'm going to add +1 because I know that I want to start 1 space after the first name ends, okay? Because there's a space in between the name. And the number of characters, you can put in an arbitrary large number. I'm going to put in 50. If you want to put in 1 billion, that's your preference, okay? But just needs to be enough that it captures enough letters in the last name. And I'm presuming most people don't have last name more than 50 characters. So there it is. That pulled out the last name. But the real trick is this adaptive? Because we know Stacy has a different number of letters in her name, okay? Will it still pull out the last name correctly? And it sure did. That was enough back when I first did this exercise, but somebody asked, could we actually pair these 2 formulas together? And I said, yes, we can do that. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and write this as one formula, one long formula. So equals mid, same reference for the text. But for the start number, we're going to put in our length function. Highlight C17. Remember, we're going to add 1 because we want to count for that space. And then put in an arbitrarily large value. So equals mid B17, comma, length function C17 +1. And then whatever the value of the characters you want to put in, all together in one function. And again, the check is to make sure that it works for both inputs. Looks like it does. All right, so that was the cool part of the Excel activity. Now we get to go to some areas that are a little bit drudge and tedious. I think they're very important to note because date conversion and date parameters are very important to have knowledge of. So let's start with the easy ones, okay? So we've got today's date here listed on the date function, 11/7/2025. Can we split out day, month, and year? And the answer is yes, and it's not very difficult to do. So if I say, what is the formula split out day? The answer is day equals DAY. What about the formula split out month? It's predictably month. The function is split out month, not the formula. What about year? Can we want to take a wild guess on that one? It's year. Okay, equals year. Like nobody trusts me anymore. So Dr. Barnes only asks trick questions. Not always, just usually. Just usually. So there we go. Day, month, and year split out. Now we're going to talk a little bit about this. There are some scenarios which this can be very useful, especially if we know that the field is split out as by date. But we're going to talk about both splitting out and then recombining this detail and why it might be useful and relevant. But let's go ahead and let's talk about one of the formulas that's very misunderstood, okay? This is the day of week formula, okay, or day of week formula. Now, I shouldn't say that or day of week formula, but it's not going to be specifically called day of week. And this gets really confusing because everybody wants to say, well, what is the formula, Dr. Barnes? And I say weekday. Now, in the English language, when I say weekday, what am I talking about? Yeah, day during the work week, okay, Monday through Friday, all right? So if we see weekday, we're probably thinking that way. Well, the geniuses of Microsoft Excel says, let's go and use weekday to talk about any day during the week. So this is the formula or the function that you would use to determine day of week. So let's just go and type it in, equals weekday. And we're going to specify what our date is. That's all we need to do. And if we look at the function, it says a returns a number from 1 to 7, identifying the week of the date, or the week of the day of the week of a date, the day of a week of the date. And you'll notice that our current input is at 6. Does that make sense? Today is Friday. We start on Sunday, and Sunday is 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it's Friday. Okay, so that's going to be the case. So we can go ahead, enter OK, and we're happy with that. Now, I recognize that some of you may not be happy with this. It's like, Dr. Barnes, I can't convert the days to weeks in my numbers in my head. That's just too much information. You already had me memorizing how to spell it. Pseudo-ultramicroscopic This is way too much, okay? So I did add a little bit of detail for you so that you can make the easy conversion. Let's go ahead. I'm going to do a VLOOKUP. If you want to do an XLOOKUP, you can. Again, because I'm an old school boomer. In Excel, just Excel. Oops, no, VLOOKUP, okay? So I'm going to look up the 6, and then if you scroll over to the right and scroll up, you'll notice that I put in some columns over here. Yeah, I did that deliberately. And that way we get our day of week listed up. So there is a fairly easy conversion that we can do there. But otherwise, you just get a number, and the number is not too hard to convert if you week Saturday is the last day of the week. Yeah. Sure. Again, the real important takeaway here is the week or the day of week formula is one of those ones that is not intuitive. It's weekday, which again, if we see weekday, we're going to think Monday through Friday, but that's again, that was just a shortened function. I really want to petition Microsoft Excel. It says, can we just make this intuitive? This is so counterintuitive to the way that we think about this, but they're probably going to say it would require way too much work and way too much code, and we wouldn't get any benefit out of it. So we're just going to have to live with the fact that the formula is weekday, or the function is weekday, not the formula, the function. All right. This one's a little bit more intuitive. What about end of month? What if I want to know the date of the end of the month and I don't remember it? So let's go ahead and just do something pretty basic. We're going to do equals EO month, which that makes a little bit more intuitive sense, right? And we're going to say start date, and it says number of months. And let's just say I want this month right now, okay? So I want to know what the end of this month is. Ooh, that's weird. Did I put something in wrong? Why does that say 45991? Anybody want to guess? It's not day format. Yeah. I did that deliberately, actually. And I know it sounds like it after the fact. You can actually go back and watch lectures from previous semesters. So you can see this exactly came up in the same way. I did this deliberately. The only time I didn't do deliberately is the first time I was teaching it, and I forgot to make a conversion. And I said, oh, that's kind of cool. I can make that conversion and talk about it in class. So I left it as it was. But I did do it deliberately today. So all you had to do, it was originally in numeric format. I just went to format cells and I changed it over to a date. That's the easy way to do that. So. All right, so November 30th, 2025, that's the end of month, which again, given that most of you have graduated, or everyone, actually most of you, goodness gracious, everyone has graduated from elementary school, I'm assuming that you knew what the last day of November was. But what if we want to speculate on what the last day is from a period of time in the future, okay? So we want to know 7 months from now. So let's go ahead and change our formula just ever so slightly. So I'm going to change end of month, and I'm just going to go down to G22. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. I'm going to go down to G22 and highlight this, which is 7 months from today. So what is the last day of the month, end of month, 7 months from now? It's going to be June 30th, 2026. Why is that date important? It means that you all will be on summer break. Some of you will be on the beach sipping margaritas or whatever, and some of you will be in middle of internships. No judgment, whatever you want to do for the summer, I'm all board. Okay. So June 30th, 2026. That would actually be funny if I say that and somebody actually is on the beach on June 30th, 2026, sipping a margarita, and then sends me a text message that says, Dr. Barnes, thinking of you. And anyway, I'm not going to be on the beach on that date. I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure. All right. Let's talk about this one called net work days. So we have got a close to the end of semester coming up on December 12th, 2025. That is the last day of finals week. So how many work days do we have till the end of the semester? Well, in the real world, the real world, the way the vernacular works is they say work days are those weekdays we talked about, Monday through Friday. I realize that as a Truman student, your work days are Monday through Sunday, okay? But ignoring that for the time being, let's say, how can we calculate the number of work days between now and the end of the semester? So let's go ahead and go equals net work days. And by the way, that is supposed to be net work days, not network days. Okay, those are different concepts. Okay, net work days. All right. So what is our start date? We're going to start with this date that we put in over here, which is today's date, and our end date is going to be the form or this date right below the cell. That was the input. So we've got 26 net work days between now and the end of the semester. So basically, if we extract all those weekend dates, which hopefully everybody gets a little bit of chance to relax on the weekends. I realize that chance is suspect because you probably still are doing work during the weekends. But for the most part, that's our work days between now and the end of the semester. But there's a bit of a caveat. Anybody want to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in that? Yeah, we've got Thanksgiving holiday coming up, okay? So what if we say, Dr. Barnes, I'm a Truman student. I accept that I'm going to be working a lot, but I absolutely am not going to eat on Turkey Day or not going to work on Turkey Day. If that's the case, if you plan on taking that one day off, we can accommodate for that, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at our calendar. And we'll notice Turkey Day is on 11/27. So let's go ahead and type in 11/27. So we don't need to worry too much about the way it's formatted because it's fine. It's just long listed a date. Let's change our formula ever so slightly. Let's go ahead and add an optional argument, which you'll notice it says an optional argument is holidays. So we can go ahead and put in holidays listed there. Then it will change our work days to 25 work days because it says, all right, we account for the fact that you're not going to work on that day. Let's do one more thing just for fun because Excel is fun, right? We can all agree to that. Okay, let's do one more thing just for fun. Let's assume, say, Dr. Barnes, I am not working on Thanksgiving because I'm going to be enjoying a celebration with my family. I am also not working the day after Thanksgiving because I go shopping on those days, okay? And if you do, you're a crazy person, okay? But no judgment as far as beyond that, okay? I've done the Black Friday shopping back when it was really in its prime. I think nowadays most people do it online, which that's a little bit more rational. But if you're one of those weird people that gets up at midnight to just go and hit the stores right as they open and tries to get the deals, you're a lot more enthusiastic than I am. You got a lot more energy than I have. Okay, so let's go ahead and assume that you're also taking 11/28 off. Can we account for multiple dates in a range? The answer is yes. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our formula again ever so slightly. But instead of one cell, we're going to highlight a series. And it does need to be set up as a series because it can only accept one argument. The good news is it will accept disaggregated dates. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a date one right after another. It can accept different dates. Just needs to identify all the dates that are going to be listed there. We can accommodate network days for that. All right, last function for the semester. Last functions for the semester. This is the date function. So this is how we can create dates if we have input data. So let's go ahead and type in equals date. Year, today's year is 2025. Today's month is 11. The day is 7. Congratulations, you've just input a date, which was much more difficult than just typing in the date. All right, so why is this useful? Why do we even bother with this? The answer is, if we've got disaggregated presentation like this, we can consolidate this into a single date field. Now, a little bit of a background on this. This was something that I did a few times, is I tried to split out date information into days, months, and years, just for a purpose of analysis. And I did this the longhand way, as that I basically copied it into a text field, and then I basically tried to split it out using delimiters. That was a much, much more complex process than just using this field. You may say, well, Dr. Barnes, you probably had to do stuff like that 20 years ago, back when Excel was underdeveloped. I was doing that like 5 years ago. Okay, so this was a formula that I did not know about, and I really feel foolish, and I'm admitting that in front of you all. So you can say, Dr. Barnes does not know everything. And the answer is, you're absolutely right. I don't know everything. As I get older and older, the more I realize, the less and less I know. Okay, so that's a sign of maturity right there. You say you don't know everything. In fact, I know very, very little. Wise man would say he knows nothing. All right, let's go ahead and try this, okay? So we're going to put disaggregated pieces of information. And fortunately, we split it out a little bit up here. So let's go ahead and highlight our year field, highlight our month field, and then highlight our day field. Put that into the formula. And again, not very impressive. We're just doing one, but keep in mind, if you got thousands of records with disaggregated information, you want to create a consolidated date, you just have to do this formula one time and then flash fill, which is what's really nice about it. And that does it. That is it. That is it for the semester. Again, as a reminder, as you're preparing for the exam, which is not too far off, we've just got a little over a week and a half before the next exam, or actually less than a week and a half, because it's a week from Monday. As you're preparing for the exam, remember, any formulas that we covered after the first exam, anything that we did during Excel activities, are viable for the exam. You already know one question that I'm definitely going to ask about, which is going to be index match, which, again, I realize it's unfair because it's a really complex formula, but I am going to ask you about it. I'm telling you in advance, there will be a question on index match. All the rest of the formulas, your responsibility are to know the components of the formulas for the exam. Not knowing the formulas enough, which, remember when I said this for the first exam, that's a little bit different than working in Excel and saying, okay, I can type in the formula in Excel, it will tell me to what to input. I expect you to know what the format is and be able to answer questions about it. So that's going to be something that I expect you to know for the exam. Make sure you spend sufficient time on it. There will be 3 multiple choice questions on Excel for the exam. Absolutely, 100% going to be on there. All right, that leads us to homework for today. So question number 1, authentication is a process by which the what? So this is just the definition of authentication. And what is authentication going to be doing? Well, it's just basically where the system identifies the user. So verifies the identity of the user. It's important to note that when we talk about authentication in this context, it can be a process or a device that does this, or perhaps both. So a process would be an example of entering your user ID and entering a password. A device might be is like when you have a 2-factor authentication, you pull out your phone and say, I'm going to go ahead and use that. Or like a token. Remember we were talking about massive multiplayer online games that used to have those token devices you had to input. Those are all examples of authentication processes, or authentication systems, I should say. All right, question number 3. To ensure confidentiality in an asymmetric key encryption system, knowledge of which of the following keys is required to decrypt the received message. Now, I do not like the context of this particular question, okay, because it's not specific as to which type of key is used, and I want to talk about why that's important here in just a second. But ignoring that, which are the ones going to be used for decryption in an asymmetric system? And you should have gone back to that diagram. We can go ahead and take a look at that slide. I think that's going to be really important and relevant to what we're going to be talking about here shortly. So let's go ahead and take a look. So we were talking about symmetric key encryption. Remember, that's the one that just has private key and same private key. It's like a padlock. For asymmetric key encryption, we have the receiver's public key and the receiver's private key. Now, technically speaking, the answer to this question, why am I blanking on where I need to go? Okay, is that none of the above answers are correct because we want to specify that this is the receiver's private key that needs to be identified, okay? The receiver's private key. But ignoring that the word receiver is not in there, and it should be, the private key is the answer is given for this, okay? Now, I will not ask you such a sloppy question on the exam. I will be very, very specific. Part of the reason why this is so important is going to come up when we talk about question 4, which you may say, we didn't have question 4 assigned for homework, and you're absolutely right, we did not. But if you may have encountered that and looked at question 4 and say, that's weird, we didn't talk about that. And I want to talk about why we didn't talk about it and what the answer is just for context, okay? So let's go into question 5 first. Question 5 is a little bit better set up. To ensure that data sent over the internet are protected, which of the following keys is required to encrypt the data before transmission using an asymmetric key encryption method? This one's pretty straightforward because we can actually use our diagram to figure out the answer. The receiver's public key is used to encrypt. The receiver's private key is used to decrypt. So these are just the opposite sides of the same question. Assuming, of course, that we put receiver's private key up here, which we didn't. But this is going to be the receiver's public key is used for encryption. Okay, used for encryption. Now, one thing to note here, and this is something that I eliminated from our lecture on Monday, and I'm going to hold to this. This is not, you're not responsible for what I'm about to talk about on the exam. But again, curiosity may strike you, and you may want to know why this question came up in the homework and what the answer is. So it's possible that we could transmute this process for the sender as well. Senders can also encrypt and decrypt a piece of information. Usually this is going to come up for authentication purposes. If we want to authenticate data, then the sender will also have a series of keys. And the order of their keys is actually transposed. They encrypt using the private key and decrypt using the public key. So why is this important? Because for authentication, it's going to be the sender's responsibility to authenticate the process. So if you'll notice on question 4, it says, to authenticate the message sender in an asymmetric key encryption system, which of the following keys is required to decrypt the message? And the answer is, it's going to be the sender's private key, okay? That will be responsible for, not to decrypt, sender's public key for decryption. So sender's private key to encrypt, sender's public key to decrypt. Again, you don't need to know that for the exam. If that's just really confusing, that's fine. I felt it was really confusing when I started trying to put together the documents to set this up. This is for authentication purposes only, and it's going to be opposite of the direction of what we talk about when we're talking about decryption of the message itself. But this is only the sender user information. So if you looked at question 4 and say, I'm not sure I know the answer to that, the answer is probably because we didn't cover it in the lecture. It is not required that you know the answer to it, but if you were just curious, that's the process that would be followed. All right, question number 7. Incentive to commit fraud will include all of the following except what? What's another word for incentive, by the way? We talked about the 3 components of the fraud triangle. This was the first one. It's incentive or pressure. Yes, okay. I usually tend to use the words pressure, opportunity, and rationalization because that's how I was taught. But we have incentive or pressure, opportunity, and attitude or rationalization. So let's just go through these. Inadequate segregation of duties. Is that an incentive? No, what would that be categorized as? So segregation of duties is a control, okay? A lack of a control would represent an opportunity, okay? We'd identify, oh, there's not good segregation of duties in my practice. I can go ahead and steal this merchandise and get away with it. So A would be our answer, but let's go through the rest, okay? Financial pressure. Would pressure be a pressure? I thought that was really funny. Okay. Yeah. Would financial pressure be a pressure? The answer is yes. Okay. Financial pressure would be a pressure. Personal habits and lifestyle. Okay. You live beyond your means. Could that possibly be an incentive or a pressure to commit fraud? Yes. Feelings or resentment. This one's a little bit dicey. I tend to think this one is more a rationalization, but it could definitely be an incentive or a pressure to commit fraud. And alcohol, drug, or gambling addiction. This is one of those sad ones that we see that happens all the time in fraud. If you have something like that, that's going to be something that leads to fraud in a lot of situations, usually smaller frauds than some others. But yeah, all of these could represent potential incentives or pressures down here. The exception, inadequate segregation duties, that's clearly an opportunity. This is what we would focus on in our analysis. A message is digested as a result of hashing. Which of the following statements about hashing process is true? All right, let's go through the answers. It is reversible. Is hashing reversible? It is not. In fact, that's the reason it's so good for message digest authentication, is it's not a reversible process. Comparing the hashing results can ensure confidentiality. What do you guys think about that? We didn't really talk about that, so it's probably not a true statement, okay? Hashing is the best approach to make sure the two files are identical. That is the very definition of hashing. That's something we talked about very specifically, okay? And in fact, that is our correct answer. Question number 10. Which of the following vulnerabilities will create the most serious risk to a firm? By the way, this is the type of question for those of you who are going to be taking a certification exam in the future. For those of you who are accounting majors, they're going to be doing CPA exam, or for those of you who are finance majors, maybe doing CFA. Get used to questions like this. This is an interesting question in the fact that all of the answers could represent risks. But that's not what the question asks. The question asks, which is the most serious risk? Interestingly enough, if you were asked this question to early versions of AI, it would not be able to identify the correct answer because it would say all of the answers are correct. So it would just choose one at random. So interesting. Current AI tools are a little bit better at this. But all of these, I think, represent risks, but we identify the most serious risks. So using open source software download for free on the firm's network. So a big firm using free software, do you think that represents a risk? Yes, but we're trying to judge the most serious risk. So let's hold on. Employees recording passwords in Excel files. Boy, that's probably not a good practice. That definitely represents a risk. Employees writing instant messages with friends during office hours. Well, they could share proprietary information unintentionally. That could be problematic. Unauthorized access to the firm's network. Okay, that is a risk, and I would argue that is our most serious risk. Why? Because we got a problem with authorization in the system, okay? Other ones represent vulnerabilities, but this one's a very clear and present danger. So it's a subjective question, but a fairly straightforward subjective question. Again, get used to questions like this if you plan on sitting for a certification exam in the future. It's a really, really important skill to be able to identify which is the most correct answer. All right. Question number 14. The symmetric key encryption method. So what do we know about symmetric key encryption? Is it slow? No, it's very, very fast, okay? Is it appropriate for encrypting large data sets? Yes, that's another advantage of it, okay? Solves problems in key distribution and key management. Does not do that at all because you have to have the same key for both sets of users, which means that it has to be proprietary or kept within the firm itself. So it's only good for inter-firm communications. That's what basically this answer is referring to. The key distribution and management will not work for outside parties because we can't actually have the same key used for outside parties. So use the same key for senders and receivers in encryption and decryption. That is a true statement. That is a true statement. That is what we just described right there. So yeah, D is our answer. Fraud triangle indicates which of the following conditions exist for a fraud to be perpetrated. Okay, so is rationalization one of those components of the fraud triangle? Yes, it is. Is pressure? Yes. What about legal environment? It is not, okay? This is one of those ones that's in the book that's not all of the above, okay? It's only A or B. It's D, okay? D is the answer. To prevent repudiation in conducting e-business. So before we move on, what's probably important to be able to answer this question? To know the definition of the term repudiation. So did anybody look at this and say, I know this term, I can move on? Okay, did anybody look at this and say, what does repudiation mean? And then go look it up on Google and find the definition of repudiation. See a few nodding heads. Did anybody look at repudiation and says, I don't know what this means, but I'm just going to try to guess from the context of the question? Stop doing that. Okay, if you don't know a term, get in the habit of looking it up. Okay, don't try to guess what it means. Okay, that's something I'm going to encourage you to do. Is it required for this class? No, I'm not going to grade you on it. Okay, it's just good life advice. Okay, so what does repudiation mean? Repudiation in context basically says the organization no longer wishes to be associated with your organization. They don't want to do business with you. That's repudiation. So to prevent another business from saying we don't want to do business with you anymore, customers or companies must be able to authenticate their trading partners. Now, this is not relevant to the question, okay? So that rant that I just went on, that was kind of a useless point in rant, but I do think it's important to get into that habit to look up information that you don't know about. Which of the following encryption methods can be used for authentication purposes? Well, if we're talking about trading partners, that's an outside party. If it's an outside party, then we know that it has to be asymmetric key encryption because we can't use symmetric key encryption except internally. So external parties would be asymmetric key encryption. All right, question number 20. Encryption is a what control? Okay, so let's go ahead and assume that if it's a detective control, it's probably also a corrective control, okay? Which means that the answer is either A or D. So how many people think A? How many people think D? A lot of people who are really on the fence about this, okay? Encryption is a preventive control. It is a preventive control. And nobody raised their hand on preventive controls, which means I'm taking off points from everybody's homework assignment for this one. Oh, Dr. Barton, you said it was completion based. I lied, okay? I deceived you. All right. No, I'm not going to take off points. I talk a big game. I talk a big game. It is a preventive control. We're trying to prevent unauthorized access to information from the get-go. So that's why encryption is a preventive control. Moving forward. The funny part is, I said I'm taking off points, and everybody just kind of giggled a little bit. It's like, yeah, we know Dr. Barnes is going to do that. You figured me out. I'm all bark and no bite. I'm like a bad dog. All right. Match the descriptions of each encryption method. So let's just go ahead and go through these. These are pretty straightforward, I think. Good for large data sets. Is this symmetric or asymmetric? Symmetric, yes. Slow in processing. Symmetric or asymmetric? Asymmetric. Convenient for key distribution and key management. Symmetric or asymmetric? It's asymmetric. This is what goes back to that discussion we were talking about on the previous multiple choice question. We do need to be able to have good key management and convenient key management if we're working with outside parties. That's why it's asymmetric. Each user has a public key and a private key. Come on, this one's easy. Asymmetric. Good for authentication. So it's an interesting question on this one, okay? Do we need to authenticate during a symmetric key process? It's only internal parties, okay? So presumably we don't need to authenticate because we already know that whoever's receiving it with internally is going to be authorized to do so because we're basically sending it to ourselves. So authentication would be only required in an external party environment, which means it have to be asymmetric. That one is a tricky one though, but that's the explanation behind it. All right, match the correct statement with each term regarding system availability. Hopefully you also caught my note on the instructions. I want you to specify if it's a preventive or corrective control, okay? So activities required to keep a firm running during period of displacement, interruption, and normal operations. Okay, that's business continuity management. All right, hopefully you got that one. Is BCM a preventive or detective or corrective control? It's corrective, yes. A process that identifies significant events that may threaten a firm's operations, outline procedures to ensure the firm will resume operation as such events occur. That sounds like DRP to me, disaster recovery planning. What type is that, preventive or corrective? That's corrective also. Service model, which the third-party service provider offers computing resources, including hardware and software applications, to cloud users over the internet, and the service provider charges on a per-user basis. Boy, this is a tough one, guys. I'm sorry I get you really, really difficult questions. Which one of these possible options is one that provides services to cloud users over the internet? Could it be cloud computing? It is cloud computing. Very well done. Very well done. What type of control is that? Preventive control. Clearly define a documented plan. I'm not going to go the whole through this because we're running out of time. That's DRP, disaster recovery planning. We already talked about it's corrective control. Using redundant units to provide a system with the ability to continue functioning when part of the system fails. What is this called? So uninterruptible power supply is listed in F. So it's fault tolerance. That's how we define fault tolerance. Basically, if one component fails, the rest of the system keeps going. Okay. Fault tolerance is what type? Preventive or detective or corrective? Preventive, yes. And then I already said F is a uninterruptible power supply. I can't speak right now. Is that preventive or corrective? Preventive. We want to keep the system up and running. We want to keep the system up and running. All right. We may run a ton of this one, but I'm going to do as many as I can in the time we're here. An employee of a telecommunications firm payroll department moved to a new position. The department no longer has privilege to access payroll accounts. However, when changing positions to access rights, payroll accounts were left unchanged. An associate told her that he was starting a financial service business and needed some contact information. Using the privileged access rights she had retained, the employee provided her with access associate confidential information for employees, including many 401k account numbers, credit card numbers, and social security numbers, then used to commit 100 cases of identity theft. Yikes. The insider's actions caused more than $1 million worth of damages to the firm and its employees. All right. So one problem with these questions right here is there's not clearly identifiable elements for all three components. So let's talk about the one that is identifiable. What's the easiest one of the three components to identify here? Opportunity, okay? Rights were not revoked from the previous position, okay? Opportunity is very clearly identifiable. Now, what do we think with respect to attitude or rationalization? If you were the one in this situation, how could you rationalize this behavior? Yeah, I'm going to help out a friend. This friend just needs a little bit of a boost and they're going to be helped out in their business. They can't cause possibly any harm. What about pressure or incentive? Yes. Friends asking you for help. Say, yeah, I'm going to help out a friend. Very good. Okay. Database analyst, major check authorization, credit card company, processing company went beyond his authorized computer access rights. The employee obtained firm's consumer information for 8.4 million individuals, stolen information, including names, addresses, bank account information, and credit card debt information. He sold the data to telemarketers over a 5-year period. Again, what is the most easily identifiable one here? This is opportunity. This is definitely opportunity. Okay. What about pressure, incentive or pressure here? Yeah, so they're kind of tied to rationalization. It's like I could sell this and make a lot of money. Maybe the pressure is that my employers don't pay me enough. So yeah, the rationalization is that, and the pressure is I need more money. So that one's a little bit not clear, but definitely a fraud going on. An IT consultant worked under contract for an offshore oil platform, was denied an offer to a permanent job at the same company. He then accessed firm's computer systems without approval and caused damage by impairing the integrity and availability of data. This one, it looks like the opportunity was they didn't have integrity in their system, and so they were able to access, basically escalate their privilege. But this one's a little bit more about the incentive or pressure. If you're in that situation and you're like, I really, really want to have a job with this company, I hope I get my job, and they say, we're not hiring you, you're not good enough here. Would you feel a little bit slighted? Yep, that would kind of lead into an incentive or pressure where we'd say, yeah, that's going to be what's going to cause me to cause fraud. And the rationalization is they deserve it. They deserve it for not hiring me. I'm not going to do the last one. We're pretty close to time. So I'm going to assume that you all got the last one correct, and we're going to come back in for our last chapter on Monday. See you all then.